Look, I got shot, I didn't die, right? Some poor person walking can be swallowed by a sinkhole,
Sure.
right? We are put on earth to be of use, to be of service. When the time is right, we will die, whether in the face of war or in our comfortable beds. It's written. We will not go a day earlier or a day later. As I said, I guess my family, my parents have shaped me for a life of service, and it doesn't tire me. It inspires me. Every time I do something, I learn something new. And I think that, I want to be able to meet my creator saying,
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. Today, we have a special guest with us. We have Professor Tan Sri Jemilah Mahmood here with us. Thank you so much, Tan Sri, for being on the show with us.
My pleasure.
I'd like to really understand your trajectory. You've had a very colorful trajectory, both personally, but also in terms of your career. Maybe for those who are unaware, give us an idea of what your life has been like leading up to where you are today.
My life, my goodness. Well, I'm born to a mixed set of parents, right? My mother is Chinese, my father is Malay, was rather. And we grew up in a large family, 7 of the same siblings from the same parents, but with the other siblings and adopted siblings, we were 13. My family, my parents, brought us up to embrace culture. We have mixed religions in my family, and we were brought up by my father to celebrate everything, always reminding us that our mom had her own roots that we need to respect. And I think growing up, I lost my father very young. I was only 11. But probably he was much older than my mom, and he had retired. In those days, they retired at 50. So he spent a lot of time with me and was probably the strongest influence in my life. But what really, I would say, was one tipping point in my very early life was May 13. And during May 13, I was a 9-year-old, and my father, being very Malay looking as well, and my mother and the 2 daughters and her looked very Chinese. So I still remember my father saying to us, if the Malays come to knock the door, you girls go and hide at the back. And if the Chinese come to knock the door, we boys will hide at the back. And I couldn't understand, right? I questioned, why is it that, these are my family? Why are they hiding? Why is it that, being brought up in such a multiracial country, I went to a Catholic school, mixed races. So it was so hard for me at the age of 9 to comprehend this. And then my father and mother did something really amazing. They were very charitable, good people. And because he was a community leader, the market knew him very well. So every time there was the curfew had a lapse of a few hours, the market people would start to send food to us, all sorts of things, fresh vegetables, live chickens and so forth. And my father, being a community organizer, knew how the area was developed. We were in Petaling Jaya in those days. And he knew which houses had female-headed households, which ones had bachelors. And he said, these people will be vulnerable because they probably, don't have the enough food. And I remember as a 9-year-old, a very small 9-year-old, being lowered into the monsoon drains around my house with a map, a hand-drawn map and packages. And my father would say, go to this house, deliver this, go to this house, deliver that. I never realized that actually marked the beginning of my humanitarian career because it left such a deep kind of, impact on me that life is of service. And, my father being a civil servant himself, was somebody who just, his whole life was about serving communities and people. So I guess, that's where I've come from. And losing a father very young and having a mother who was not educated, but realized she had to go to work, And before my father died, he asked her, "What are you going to do when I die?" Because he had cancer. And she said, "I'm going to go into business." And he said, "What do you want to do?" And she said, "Shipping." My father's kind of looked at her, I still remember. And he said, "How are you going to do that?" And she said, "I will learn." And I have vivid memories of the last year of his life where he would drive the car and me to the port, and my mom would be there. Initially, she was supplying laborers to clean the ships. She started that way. And my father would come with a tiffin carrier. We would have a meal on the wharf side with my mom and then take her home. So, my mom went on to be a ship owner, and very successful, worked very, very hard. So I guess the second thing that impacted me in my life was nothing comes easy. My parents told me that you have to work very hard and must be very sincere. And the other thing that really also deeply impacted me was when I was in Form 3 and my brother was in Form 5. And my mom pulled us aside and sat us down and she said, "I know you guys are classified Malay, but when you get your results and if you do very well, you will not take a scholarship." She said, "If you take a scholarship, I'm going to chop your right hand off." And I still remember, as a bit young, right? And we were like, "Why would you do that?" And she said, "Because isn't that the rule for stealing?" So she was so proud, She was like, "I can work. I can put you in school. I can put you through university. You will not deprive someone else of their rights." So I guess I've grown up with the feistiness of my mom and the resilience of my mom and the gentleness of my father in terms of, understanding communities and diplomacy. So I feel very blessed.
Yeah. And at which point for you did you begin to realize, you've grown up obviously with all of these values, but at which point did you feel that there was almost this handover and this sense that, I can actually start to live this out myself?
Yeah. I think it was, I don't think I ever changed. When I was in school, going to missionary school, whole life you're fundraising, right? Because missionary schools never have money. So I was always, bringing food to sell. And I remember I was the president of the Leo Club, and very active in school, Girl Guides and everything. So I guess, my whole life my extracurricular was even more busy than my actual studying. I still remember when I was in Form 5, I keep giving away my books to poorer students. And I'd go back to my mom and say, "Mom, I lost my geography book." And then she'll give me a bit of money to buy my geography book. And I think a while after that, she kind of realized that something is not right. And she said, "I'm not giving you any more money for books." And I actually go to one of my best friends in school. Her name's Margie. And I said, "Margie, you got to lend me your books and your notes, And she said, "Why?" She said, "I don't have them." So she said, okay, but, do quickly, because I'm doing second round, third round, she's such a good student. But I would borrow her books and her notes and study and give back, right? Thank God I did well in my exams. But then I, wanted to do medicine, right? Yeah. And I think partly there are many reasons why I wanted to do medicine. I think one is I saw my father suffer through cancer. So I thought, I want to one day be of comfort to somebody. But the second thing, which is quite funny, is when I was in school, we had to fill up the life cards. And you're supposed to write your ambition, right? You don't have it now, but I think maybe for you, just remember that? Yeah. This manila cardboards, and you had to put your what you want to be when you grow up, right?
We didn't have manila cardboard. They gave us a small strip. Paper, and we had to write it down and stick it. I was in boarding school. Sticker on my bed. The headmaster used to call it pinpoint primary goal. PPPG. So every day must look at it and say what is it you want to become.
So we had these files that every year we would file. So I would be, the first one would be like, concert pianist. Second would be actress. I was like very into the arts, right? And I had this left-right brain that was equal. And then one of my friends, actually, she was an Indian girl, and she looked at me and she said, I looked at her life card. Every year she would put doctor, right? And I'm like, hey, why you don't have any, imagination? Life is so fun. You must do everything. Then she said to me, "Oh, you Malays, you will become clerks and teachers. We Indians become doctors. The Chinese become accountants." So I was like, why like that? So the next year I put doctor. I said, I want to be a doctor also. I'm going to, and I have to thank her for antagonizing me then. But, as a young person, you kind of like, I guess I don't like to be challenged. To be given a challenge, I will rise to it.
Yeah.
So I decided then, I'm very determined now. I'm going to be a doctor. And then in my career, of course, I was very active in public service. And I was teaching in a university. And then I decided that I wanted to go out into private practice, mainly because I felt I couldn't grow in the university. As you can imagine, I'm quite a restless person. I was given many offers to, go for postgraduate studies and so forth. I always labeled too young, let other people go first. And I got fed up. So I left and of course went to private practice, enjoyed it, delivered many, many babies and treated many patients. But I felt life was empty. I went back to that moment on May 13, right, and asked myself, didn't I want to do medicine to be of service to others? At the time as well, my mom passed away, and I looked at her, and and she was on her deathbed thanking me. She said, "Thank you for being a good daughter to me, and I know you're different." She said, "I know that you're different." She didn't want me to be a doctor; she wanted me to do business. And she said, follow what your heart tells you. And I think that time, I was searching. And then I saw what was going on in the world. At the time also, remember, people were on the streets in 1998.
Yes.
And I felt Malaysians, of course, I'm not a politically inclined person, but I felt very sad that, even in families, people were arguing and having conflict because of political ideologies. And I wanted to build something for Malaysia that would bring people together. So, I was inspired to build MERCY Malaysia. And partly because I was watching television and the whole war in the Balkans was going on in Kosovo. And usually a typical Asian mother, right?
Yeah.
Telling your child, when my child was 5 years old, and I said, you see, they have no food and all that. You have to be very grateful for what you have. You must eat whatever you're given and so forth. And my son very innocently looked at me and said, you're a doctor. Why don't you go and help them?
Yeah.
Right? So kind of, said, yeah, he's right. So I looked around and I asked my husband, what should I do? And he said, well, who's doing this stuff? So I started to write to many organizations to say, can I go to Kosovo during the war? I'd like to offer 6 months. You don't have to pay me. I want to take time out. I want to help people. And no one replied, right? Probably thought this mad woman wants to go to war zone, right? So then he said, you're a good organizer. Why don't you start something? So it's a very funny story starting MERCY Malaysia. I learned then that, you have to have 7 board members must come from different states to be called Malaysian something.
Okay.
So, my husband, I said, you cannot be involved because, it'll be not good governance. So I went to the operating theatre the next day. My anesthetist was for Kedahan. The surgeon that was operating was from Sabah. My best friend is from Kelantan. Another best friend is from, So I just found people to say, can you just sign this thing and just trust me that I will do something good with it, right? So they all like, okay, sign on the dotted lines and that's how MERCY Malaysia was started.
Interesting. I remember the first time I read about you.
Yeah.
It was the 26th of December 2004, the tsunami event in Aceh.
Yeah.
I mean, you were there doing lots of work prior to that, I'm sure. But that's the first time I knew about you.
Yeah.
If I read the newspaper at that time, within 72 hours of that event, you were leading an international team. I mean, with MERCY Malaysia. Out there, you guys put up mobile clinics and you're doing some field hospital and emergency stuff. Really incredible. Tell me the challenges that you went through and how did you overcome them in such a short period of time?
I'll tell you the real story behind that. So we were founded in 1999. Our first mission was to Kosovo, and then we went to Afghanistan, to Turkey, everywhere. The tsunami happened, and I still remember 26 December. By that time, I had just been trained by the UN to be a member of the UN disaster team. And as usual, I get the alerts. And I looked at the alerts and turned on the television, and you see everything about Phuket and a little bit about Sri Lanka. There was nothing on Aceh. So I looked at the epicenter and figured that probably all communication lines are down. So I said to the team, okay, guys, we got to go to Aceh. But, Aceh at the time was a conflict zone.
Yes.
So it was not easy to get there. I wasn't the first member of the team that led the team. I sent my my architect. He's a board member. His name is Azam. And I said, Azam, take Leong. I was one of the doctors. Take one of the nursing sisters, go and do a quick assessment and then call me. So they flew in. They were there even before the president of Indonesia. And then when the minute he arrived, he called me. He says, I can't do anything. There's dead bodies everywhere. And it's so devastating. I've never seen anything like this. So I got on the next plane and left and brought the whole team, and we flew in. So I think that for us, two things, CNN picked this up and suddenly Leong was on CNN and people thought
it was a big thing on CNN.
They thought it was Mercy International. So my friends in Mercy Corps were saying, we're not there yet, but we're getting money. So I said, you owe me because they saw the name Mercy is so common, right? But it's very funny that people thought it was an international organization. So we went, we sent teams in. At the time, the only place that we could set up camp was actually the military hospital because it was on a hill. And many of the doctors had left. Many, of course, had died, but because they were searching for their families. So, it was very, very sad. We were staying in the nurses' hostel. Many of the nurses were killed. So we just did what we could with what we had. And I still remember, getting a phone call from then the president of Petronas, Tan Sri Muhyiddin, right? And he called me and he said, what can we do? What can we do to help you? And I said to him, give me a bit of time. I don't want to tell you what I need till I actually know what I need. So people were suddenly calling me to say, we want to offer you money and so forth. But I was so afraid to ask for money because I really needed to know how terrible the situation is and what is it, that we could realistically do rather than take money and not deliver, right? I think the rest is history because that was a turning point. And Tan Sri Azman Mokhtar sent his team to meet me and he said, what do you need? I said, I need a strong organization. I need this organization to outlive me. Help me with ensuring that this organization has good governance, good accountability. So he sent a whole team, from Pricewaterhouse, from Hay Group, from Accenture, all of them came to help us and really strengthen the governance of the organization while we were doing our work. And I owe a lot to that because what then Khazanah did was I said to Tan Sri Azman then, I said, support me for 5 years for me to run all my CapEx and OpEx so that anything I raise from the public goes to people. I don't have to give it to my staff for salaries and so forth. Give me 5 years so that I can do this. And then he said, okay. I guess the rest is history. Mercy has become such a strong organization. And the other thing that, another turning point was actually, after I got injured in Iraq, I decided that I have to build a succession plan, right?
Tell us a little bit about how you got injured. I think that's important.
Actually, we were on a mission to Iraq. We had been there before the war, and we had promised them that, in the event of a war, we would be back and we would support them. At the time, we got a message that they were very short of medical supplies, surgical supplies. Again, the doctors, many had fled because, it was, they didn't want to be working. So, protecting their families and so forth. So we went in, but we took all precautions. We were in Doha first. We talked to the US command. We did everything possibly that we could. I had a security advisor who was ex-military, so he knew what to do. But it was just bad luck. We just happened to be moving from one hospital to another with surgical supplies. And our two ambulances got caught in crossfire between two villages. And what happened then was, our ambulance was struck. Our one driver was killed. The pharmacist was killed. It's very strange. I mean, if I tell you the real story, the night before I had a dream that my mom told me something bad would happen. And, but she said, but you're not going to meet me yet. She said, but just be careful. And for some reason, I decided to change seats. And the person next to me, Dr. Baba, who is really wonderful, he also had a very strange dream. And he said, I want you to change seats with me because normally I sit on the side. So they put me in the middle. And he got very badly injured, right? He was hit by the bullet. The bullet went through him and into me. So,
Did he die?
No. But he was injured. So we had to actually operate him. And so forth. But I guess, that was a terrible time. I needed psychotherapy for 6 months because I was so traumatized. I felt like a failure. I felt like, I had put my team in danger and so forth. And many times, I felt I wanted to quit, right? But we relived the whole thing. What did we do wrong? I don't think we did anything that, it's just bad luck. Sometimes this happens. But the saddest thing was that we realized that humanitarian workers were no longer sacrosanct, right?
Of course.
War, international humanitarian law had been breached. It was a very clearly marked ambulance. But, people have gone crazy. And you're seeing this now play out, in Gaza, in everywhere else, right, in the world. But that also led to many other killings of humanitarian workers, and the bombing of the UN in Iraq, of course. So that, I remember my husband and some friends saying to me, if you quit, those people who died did not died for no reason. He said, you have to honor them by continuing to work. And so I did, right? But I also created my succession plan so that 10 years after I started MERCY Malaysia, I exited and handed over. And I don't play any role except being a supporter. And maybe if I can volunteer, I will. But I think good leadership must be knowing when to leave.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of what you have described so far, and even later on, we'll start to talk about the work that you're currently doing. But so much of what you have been describing so far, everything's been either very countercultural or counterintuitive. I mean, at this point, the situation in Iraq, that was, I believe it was 2003.
Yeah.
So at that time, you would have still been a fairly young parent as well. What were some of those conversations like with your family before heading over to Iraq?
I think I'm very lucky. I have an extremely supportive husband, right? He always says that I can't do the things that you do. But the things you do are so important. I should not be a barrier to you doing this. And he said, you run, I cheer. Don't worry about the kids. I'll take care of the kids, And I was very lucky that I had, a very, very good helper who's really like a second mom to them. I try to sit down with my kids and tell them, I'm trying to do this because there are many kids who don't have moms and don't have, parents to take care of them. But you are still number one, right? If you tell me to stop, I stop. But I guess they were too young to understand, and they, probably, didn't say anything. But I'm sure it impacted them, right? I think that they must have resented me because in the teenage years it was getting more difficult. But now that they're all adults, they understand. The other thing I did was, apart from conflict zones, every time after things had calmed down, I would bring my children to see what I had done. So I've brought them to Syria. I've brought them to Iran after the earthquake. Showed them what we built, so that they understand that their mom's not just going gallivanting, right? I mean, they're doing something. I don't know. I didn't bring that to Afghanistan. It's too dangerous. But Aceh, my son volunteered and taught English, and as a 13-year-old, so I try to bring them to see what we do, right?
So far, we've talked about dealing with suffering at the level of the individual. But then you transitioned over to thinking about how you can actually start to make systemic change.
Yep.
Maybe describe to us, is there kind of a difference in terms of the weight that you feel when you're dealing with individuals versus now at a more macro scale?
Yeah. In 2000, I was watching television at the time, and there was a terrible flood in Mozambique. And if you Google on YouTube, you can still see it. A woman climbed up a mango tree and gave birth to her daughter, clinging onto her for dear life, and then a South African rescue helicopter picking her up and rescuing her. And I this was going on, and CNN, BBC was showing the terrible floods and crocodiles in the water and whatever. And I was saying to myself, as an obstetrician and gynecologist, oh my God, how does she do this? It's so hard to deliver even, on your own, but on a tree, right? And not drop the baby in water and so forth. So that kind of lived with me for a long time. And as my humanitarian career grew, I saw more and more impacts of climate change, right? Severe flooding, severe weather events. In 2019, 19 years later, I was working in Switzerland as the Undersecretary General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent. And we brought a group of donors to Mozambique because they just had a terrible flood. And we had a program there and we wanted to visit. So I spoke to the midwife in the clinic and I said, I still remember this image on television in year 2000 of this woman who gave birth on a tree, and she looked at me and she just smiled and she pointed to a little boy that I had been playing with and she said, well, his mother gave birth in a tree during the flood. So I think that was the aha moment for me, my other tipping point that, my goodness, have I been putting Band-Aid on gaping wounds, right? Apart from conflict and so forth, where you need immediate, but in terms of weather events, until and unless we tackle the underlying drivers of why people are becoming so vulnerable and why, severe weather events are happening, we can't keep, putting aid as a cure for this. And that was about the time that I was introduced to this planetary health concept, which is about, as a doctor, that the health of human civilization is very dependent on the planet's health. And it was a fairly new area that was emerging. And I thought, I should look into this because it crosses, it's about systems change. It's about looking at economic, environmental, health, social justice, and equity. And then lo and behold, just a month and a half or 2 months after that, we had the pandemic. Then that really drove it home to me. My goodness, this is what I need to do now. I need to look at systems and I need to look at planetary health. And of course, the rest is history. I came back to escape the pandemic from Switzerland because it was so bad there. And, people can criticize Malaysia, but, at the time you can't even get a test kit where I was. And I remember the office calling me to say the last flight is tomorrow. So I just packed 2 bags and ran off to the airport and came home. And then, got pulled in to be the advisor for the Prime Minister. But my aim then was really to think about setting up something on planetary health in the region. I felt I needed to come back to Asia. I had promised my family that when I'm 60, I come home. And that, Asia is the most vulnerable region in the world, right? Asia Pacific. So thankfully, Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia, had to listen to all my, mumbling and grumbling and complaining because we sat next to each other during the Economic Action Council. And I said, Tan Sri, this is what we need. We need this center. And of course, he didn't know what it was all about, but he's such a believer in sustainable development. So I think I managed to convince him and he said, okay, why don't you set it up in Malaysia? So I said, okay, if you support me, I will set it up. So we've set up now the Sunway Centre for Planetary Health.
Tell me a bit more about the conversation that you had with Tan Sri Muhyiddin when he invited you to the government. Did he call you on the phone? How did it happen?
I got a phone call to say, come to the office for lunch.
Right.
I walked in and there were, I think 8 or 9 journalists and photographers suddenly snapping pictures, and he passed me a white envelope. And I took it and smiled. And then he said, maybe you should read what's in there. But, I've known Tan Sri Muhyiddin for a long time.
Right.
I've always respected him. And, so I said, Tan Sri, what do you want me to do, Tan Sri? And he said a couple of things. He said, number one, I want you to make sure and I was very touched when he said this. I've been very lucky. He said, I have, as you know, I'm a cancer survivor. I have had access to the best healthcare. I want to make sure that Malaysians have access to good healthcare. Tell me what we should be doing. I need a report card on how we're doing. Give us some strategies. Number 2, he said, please help out with the COVID strategy because you've worked in so many crises, and I've been involved with Ebola and all the other crises before, so I know how to manage large-scale crises, right? But so I said, okay, I do what I can. I quit my job in Switzerland. I came back, and the lesson I learned is it's very difficult to be an advisor. Gosh, if anyone appoints me again, I will say no from day one, right? Because you can only advise. People may take your advice or not take your advice, right? And for someone like me, I'm so blunt, outspoken. I just feel that for me, my true north is clear. I have to tell you whether and I told him this, Tan Sri, you know me, right? I will say something even if you don't like it. I will tell you what I think. I will not say something to please you. I will tell you what's important for you to know. And he said,
during a crisis that is so important, COVID-19 crisis. There's no time for niceties.
Absolutely. And I said to him, are you willing to work with me, because I can be difficult. And he said, no, it's okay, I know. And I learned later he had called Syed Hamid Alba, Tan Sri Hamid Alba, and Tan Sri Hamid Alba said, you better know what you're in for if you ask her to be your advisor, because she will tell you things that you may not want to hear. And I'm glad that he told Tan Sri Muhyiddin that, right? So it was a very tumultuous 1.5 years for me. It was difficult. It was very difficult because I felt I knew what to do, and but it was hard for me to get some ideas across. But I think the turning point was when he actually took my advice on the Greater Klang Valley Task Force. And I think you would have seen the Deputy DG wrote about it as well in Code Blue, that, I had orchestrated this and designed the whole thing. And of course, the other thing was, the good advice that I think the best thing he did was took my advice to appoint Khairi Jamaluddin as the vaccine minister, because we needed someone who could communicate well, who was charismatic, and one of the best people I've ever worked with in my life was KJ. Such a intelligent, smart person. He's one of those who's humble enough to listen to advice and then consider what he wants to do. He's an avid reader. You send him anything, he reads through it, tries to understand it, asks the right questions. So that was the best part of, the advisory work. Was I then shifted to just support the whole vaccine program. And I think that was so fulfilling, because we got a very good vaccination rate in Malaysia. We managed the pandemic well because of that, right? In a crisis, there are a couple of very salient rules that we as crisis managers do, right? One, communicate well, right? But you must communicate in a way that is not just data. It's about reassuring people, giving them confidence, building hope, and treating every member of society as an important person to help you through. It's not just government, right? It's civil society, communities, the private sector, NGOs. The second is you've always got to do a risk analysis every step of the way, right? Vaccines or no vaccines, what type of vaccine, what do you decide? There are a couple of things that I feel I tried so hard that I did not get until later. Was, we have such a dichotomous health system in Malaysia.
Right.
You have private sector, public sector, and it's so, not trusting each other.
There's a huge China wall between them.
So, from the start, I was saying decant all the non-COVID patients to the private hospitals.
Absolutely.
So that the public hospitals become only COVID hospitals, right? But there seems to be a whole issue of why should we pay money to the private sector? You're not paying money. They're supporting you, right? Using GPs for the vaccination program. Oh my God, so much resistance. But we could have been more efficient, I think, in managing, because in the end, it was a bit klangkabut, right? You have to send some patients. In the end, when the public hospitals couldn't cope, you have to send to private hospitals. And private hospitals are not equipped to manage with COVID, right? They don't have the right expertise. They don't have the number of nurses that public hospitals do, but they did very well. They coped. And credit to KKM, they send experts to help them and so forth. So that's good. But I think that, from the outset, we should have been one sort of health, the health ministry should be for everyone, should be for the whole entire ecosystem. And I think that that's a big lesson we took away. I wrote something called the COVID Playbook. In fact, in February 2020, I wrote the whole reset of the COVID response, how to reopen the economy. But of course, it wasn't accepted. But I guess I differed in opinion, because I really felt that we should have opened up earlier. We could have done a much more different tactic in terms of many more rapid antigen tests, liberalizing testing like the UK and other places, just give everybody test kits. And then, really educating people that, it's you are part of the solution. As the public, you need to, but that's difficult because, it's very easy for us to say, oh, you should stay at home and all that. Why? Because we can afford it. But for people who are daily income workers and all that, they were so badly affected economically. And I think we're still suffering the economic consequences and from the pandemic. I still remember, then Tunku Zafrul telling us we're losing $1 billion a day, in terms of trade and economy, right? And so when you, again, on risk analysis, the cost-benefit ratio of actually decanting would have been much better than, But of course, history is a good lesson. Hindsight is 20/20, as they say. I completely respect the decisions that were made because when you're put in a leadership position, you have to make the decisions. But as I said, it's hard being an advisor because sometimes your advice is not taken. But, it is what it is. And we came through and, our people did, well in terms of protecting our population. But I hope the lessons have been learned.
Speaking of lessons learned, but I think also coupling that with, I think your general best practices, throughout the years. When it comes to crisis management, you talked about, risk analysis, but there's also a bit of a temporal paradox, isn't it, in crisis management? Because on the one hand, it's a crisis, which then therefore means there has to be an urgency and speed as a result. But at the same time, you also need to have a cool head to be able to think critically, and thinking slow as well, where appropriate. How do you actually manage that balance?
So this think fast, think slow bit, right? Actually, if you've done it for so many years, you must remember I've done this 25 years, right? It becomes intuitive. And I think you cannot disregard intuition because when you've been confronted with so many crises one after another, you learn to think fast and slow. For me, the first thing I think of when I'm doing an emergency response is how do I save lives? The second thing is how do I exit? And exit is slow thinking, right? So you when you think about exit, you have to look at all the strategies you need to put in place so that people are stronger than when you found them. And that applies to any crisis, which means that you've already got to imagine the exit and what then are the steps you need to take to that. And I think keeping a cool head is essential because if you can't keep a cool head, you shouldn't be managing crisis. It needs a certain kind of person, I think, that can do this. Having said that, I will be lying to you if I didn't say that there are times where I might panic. Because, when you're confronted with bombs dropping around you, the natural tendency is, is it flight or flee, whatever, right? But when you're a leader, you have to think not only of yourself, you have to think about your team, you have to think about your community that you're serving. You can't be running away from the community. I still remember in Afghanistan, we were working and then they were dropping a lot of bombs and we were told by the security team, we have to evacuate that area. Until today, I can hear the cries of the women who clung on to me and said, don't leave, right? And I said, I have no choice because this is a security advice. We have to follow strict security protocols as well because we've got to make sure our doctors are safe. But that feeling is horrible when you have to leave a community that we don't know what's going to happen to them, right? Because we have to evacuate. So I guess it's realizing that, number one, you alone cannot think of yourself. Number two, you've got a team that's good, that's going to be with you, that's going to think with you. And also to understand, you have to have a lot of self-awareness. There was one point I broke down in Aceh. And I was doing CPR on a child, and the child was exactly the same age as my son at home, and looked like my son, right? And he was caught, and in the tsunami, his lungs were filled with dirt and all sorts of things, and we were pumping and trying to suck out as much as we could, and he kept calling for his mother. At that point, I said, okay, I can't do CPR anymore, right? I had to turn to my colleagues and say, can someone take over, please? And I walked away and I actually cried, right? Because suddenly I thought about my son. And you know how the natural instinct of a child is to always look for the mother when he's, you know, in trouble. So there are moments, right? If I'm not self-aware, I think I would have continued doing CPR. I might have hurt him, might have, you know, done more damage. But I think self-awareness is extremely important, right? But these things stick with you, you know, for the rest of your life. Yeah.
Incredible.
How do you exercise self-awareness or become more self-aware?
I guess it's telling yourself that vulnerability is not a bad thing. I think that if you say that you are so strong, you're not vulnerable, then you're not very strong, right? Acknowledging that we as human beings will be vulnerable. There will be moments in our life that we are vulnerable, right? And that we accept that vulnerability. We know when to ask for help. We know where to get the help. And, you know, walking away to a safer place to recompose, right? And taking time out, whatever, you know, but knowing that vulnerability is real. I think, you know, acknowledging that.
That's why I call it vulnerability as a virtue.
It's a virtue. It reminds us of our humanity. Yeah.
I remember that when you guys were going to Kandahar in Afghanistan, that's the year 2001.
Yeah.
You were the first civilian humanitarian in Malaysia that went to an active war zone.
Yeah.
I mean, at that time when I was reading about what you guys were doing, wow, I said, what's this lady doing?
You know, I had land in Kandahar. Really? It's crazy. The governor of Kandahar liked us so much and gave us 9 hectares of land. Wow. I don't know what the deed is, but you know, not that I want land in Afghanistan, but he liked us so much. I remember them writing notes on papers to say, we carry this in their national language to show people that, you know, and it said, protect them. And I think this is something that, you know, I tell people who want to do humanitarian work, you can have all the guidelines in the world.
Yeah.
But the best security you have, apart from God, is the community.
Yeah.
To speak to them, to get them to understand why you're there. You know, in Sudan, I still remember we had major operations in Darfur, right? Again, another crazy war zone, which is still under war now. And the UN had produced a security tree. So they tell you, okay, this happens, you run here, you go there and go there. But the UN compound is a beautiful compound, far from the compound we had. Because we're MERCY Malaysia, right? We can't afford expensive compounds. So, you know, I said to myself, okay, how am I going to leave my team here? Because we were we built a women's hospital, a health center in Janina in Darfur. And so I asked my driver, I said, tell me, who are the 3 most influential people in your community? He said, the imam, the midwife, and the head teacher. So I said, okay, we will cook dinner tonight. Can you ask the imam, the head teacher, and the school teacher to come, and the midwife to come? So I sat with them and I said, my team is going to stay. We're going to offer services to you. We're going to build this women's healthcare center. How do I keep them safe? How can I leave knowing that they are not safe? Tell me, how will you protect them? So they drew, then I said, you have 2 to 3 days to go away. I gave him some money. I said, when you come back next time, please cook us something and then we can eat together. So 3 days later, they came back. They brought very nice rice and lamb and whatever. Imam made me a pair of snake skin shoes. You know, I don't know which snake he caught. But we sat down and then he took out a piece of paper and he said, well, the first thing you do is you run to the mosque, which is across the road. From there, we will take you to this village. This person will take care of you. He is the head man, is the, you know, relative of the midwife. And then from there, we will move you to here and then you are safe. So, you know, that was our security tree, a community protection service. So I could leave the teams there. You know, and our head of operations was a woman, was Anita, who stayed back for months to take care of the operations, oversee the development of the, you know, healthcare, health facility and so forth. So, you know, it's the humility that you need to know the community that you're helping are not helpless, right? They have skills, they have knowledge. They are the ones who probably know best what they need. not what you think they need. So I get very annoyed when people start sending food and all that without checking with the communities what they really need, right? So I think that humility is extremely important, yeah.
Speaking of humility, when do you feel like you have been most humbled, whether personally or in your career?
Many moments, Leon. I remember in Iraq, for example, we were staying in the doctor's family quarters. The hospital that we worked in, because my colleague was so badly injured, we had to move him there. It was a very dangerous area, Chuada, but he had a good blood bank, so we had to put him there. And I remember that, a lot of the surgeons had run away. So they were really reliant on a couple of surgeons who never went back to the house, even though it was 100 feet away. And I still remember that there were 3 mothers, right? 3 spouses, and they had their children. And every time the bombs dropped, the behaviors of the 3 women were very different. One would cook, so she would cook all these sweets and feed the children, so they were all very plump and, eating sweets all the time. The other was very nervous, so she would be huddling with the child. And then the third was a doctor, right? She was a young, I think, obstetrician, and she was very calm. So she would read to her daughter and so forth. And just watching them being so humbled by these 3 women that had different coping mechanisms. And then just as I was injured, I had to no one to stitch me up at the time. I had to stitch my wound. And I was feeling a bit sorry for myself because I was in pain. And then suddenly the door knocked and the young doctor came and she said to me, there's a woman in labor. She has a hemoglobin, her blood count, iron count was very low, was 6. We need to transfuse her, but we only have 1 pint. I need a very experienced surgeon because she's had 3 previous cesareans. Will you please assist me in this surgery? So I said to myself, okay, but I will need you to put a box on the floor so that I can put my left lower limb on the box, and I need someone to hold me from the back because I was worried I would tip over. So we did the surgery. We delivered a baby boy. I have a photograph of him until today. And after that, I said, okay, I'll come back and see the patient after 6 hours or so and see how she's doing. So I hobbled back to the room. And then I came back 6 hours later, and this woman was sitting on the bed. And I looked and I said, is this the woman we operated? And the nurse said, yes. And I went to her and through a translator, I said, what are you doing? She was packing her clothes, right? And she looked at me and she said, if the bombs drop tonight, I want to be with my children. And I said to myself, here's a woman I just cut open, and all she could think about was her children. Here I am with a tiny wound in my hip, feeling sorry for myself. I felt so embarrassed, I remember emptying my entire backpack with my painkillers. I had given it all to her, and I said, you need this more than me. And I felt then that, there was a reason why I was shot. There was a reason why I was in that hospital. I was there, I think, put there to help this woman, right? So I never complained after that. I continued working. It was not easy working when bullets are flying around, and it was scary. But that woman taught me a big lesson in courage. Taught me a big lesson that no matter how terrible you think your situation is, there's someone worse off than you. And you always to be grateful, right? So that, that you can continue working.
Well, people like you, Tan Sri, putting your life, you and your team, putting your lives at risk to save other lives. These people like you and your team, they're people 1 in a million. And very few people would say, I'm putting my life at risk in order to save other lives. It must have been really difficult for your family thinking that you're putting yourself out there for other people. What about us? If something happened to you, does it bother you sometimes?
It does bother me. My husband has been very good at shielding the children, right? I remember when I got shot, it was on the newspapers and all that. And my sister, my late sister, God bless her, she was hysterical. She was in London thinking that, was I just shot? Was I raped? As usual, her imagination went wild. And then she said to me, I called your husband, and he was so calm. He said, don't worry, she'll be fine. She'll come out of this. Because,
when he married you, he knew what he was
he knew. I told him, you know what I'm like. He said, yes, I know what you're like, yeah. But we are people of faith.
Yeah, sure.
We know that our time is written.
Yeah.
Look, I got shot, I didn't die, right? Some poor person walking can be swallowed by a sinkhole,
sure.
Right? If we don't believe that, we are put on earth to be of use, to be of service, that when the time is right, we will die, whether in the face of war or in our comfortable beds. It's written. We will not go a day earlier or a day later, right? But as I said, I guess my family, my parents have shaped me for a life of service, and it doesn't tire me. It inspires me. Every time I do something, I learn something new. And I think that, I want to be able to meet my Creator saying, I've tried my best, and irrespective of, faith or race or nationality, we are just one human race. And I've seen the kindest and most generous people in the worst of situations who have nothing yet. They want to share what they have with you.
Yeah.
And again, that restores my faith in humanity. You know?
And speaking of which, I think part of our duty as people of faith as well, we believe that this idea of the afterlife or heaven is both now, but it's also not yet. And so there's also a duty to bring some of that to our current reality. There are some schools of thought, some camps that think, well, it's okay. We don't have to think about the state of the world, the state of the planet, because we have the afterlife to look after. For you, how has your faith informed and maybe driven the work that you're doing now in the area of planetary health?
I think planetary health for me, now, especially now that I have a grandson, an adorable grandson, a 1-year-old, I keep working now because I want to make sure I've done my best for his generation. Because planetary health is about intergenerational justice, right? We have damaged the planet so badly that the future generations will suffer. And, I want to be able to do that. And I want to be able to, have a grandson that says, my Nana worked very hard to protect the planet and to protect my generation, right? So for me, I don't think about, I really don't think about going to heaven. I don't think that far. I think about what I want to do now that is good. And I will leave the rewarding business to Allah, right? That because it's not my job to decide what I get. Do what you can, the best of your ability, as sincerely as you can, because sincerity is so important. And then the rest you leave to, our Creator will decide what is good for us. And even if, my volunteer is a person of non-faith, they are spiritual. They believe in goodness, right? They believe in kindness, and I think that binds us together. And I think that again, I'm the idealist Malaysian who believes that being brought up in a multiracial family, multi-faith family, I want to see that again. I yearn for this, and I think MERCY Malaysia has offered that platform where. I remember when I started MERCY Malaysia, I said I want to plant a seed under which shade I will not experience, right? But hopefully, if this is a good organization, it will outlive me, right? Many people said, "Oh, you're going to leave MERCY, it's going to collapse." I said, "No, it won't.
Yeah, somebody else will
There'll
take
be a
over.
new leader that will shape the organization in a new way, right? It may not be exactly like I was. It could be better, but that's not for me to now judge. It's for me to say that I planted that seed, let it grow." and to also know that not everything is eternal. If, for example, we reach a stage where it doesn't have to exist anymore, it can stop existing. But in the time that it's going, and it's 26 years now, it has grown and it has, flourished and it has done well.
Yeah. I want to come back to this thinking fast and thinking slow. I had an episode I want to share. When I was a temporary teacher in Chung Hua, a secondary school in Miri, I was 21 years old. I took my students for a picnic on a Saturday. And there was another group of students from St. Joseph. They were also picnicking. There were two girls that had gone out into the sea, and they had got separated from the log they were seated on. And so they were already drowning. And I didn't know that. One of the students from that school ran to me and said, "Teacher, student drowning." And at that point in time, I thought it was as a joke. I didn't think it was serious. Then I looked far out into the sea. I saw these two girls very far out. So I ran towards them. This is acting fast.
Yeah.
Thinking really fast. The only thing I knew was
you have to save them.
I need to go and save them. Yeah. I need to now run as fast as I can. As I was swimming towards them, that's the thinking slow was coming in. I then asked the question, what am I going to do when I reach out these two girls? And if I catch them, aren't they going to jump over me and pull me down? That was while I was swimming towards them, the slow thinking was taking place there. And as I was, the first reaction would have been to go and get them and do a rescue. And that would have been very risky. Then I saw, well beyond them, the log was out there. So the slow thinking told
Kicked
me,
in,
don't go to get the log and push it towards them.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I did. I went towards the log. I went past them and brought the log over. And one of the girls jumped onto the log and survived. And the other girls had already drowned. And she, at that point in time, she was floating out already. Then I reached out to her, touched her, but she was not moving. I couldn't put her in the log. So I pulled her body onto the sand and I did the CPR. I can tell you, she was already by that time blue in the face. She already died, but I tried to rescue her. To no avail. The other girl who got out from the incident, she just was so frightened, she ran away. She just ran and disappeared. I went to school on Monday. The parents of that girl came to my school and they said, "We want to thank you because our daughter is alive from what you did."
Yeah.
But the other girl had died,
Yeah. And it lives with you, right?
Yeah, it lives with me. I think I probably never remember now for 3 or 4 days after doing the CPR on this girl because foam was coming out from her. I couldn't eat. As you said, there's an element of trauma that stayed with me for a little while thinking about this.
Yeah.
And I asked the question, could I have done something a little different?
Yeah.
I only knew that all I had was a few seconds of thinking about what needed to do. And I went to do the best I could. And that was all I could do at that time. I was 21 years old actually.
Yeah.
It's interesting. If the true north is to save lives, but also then to effect, real meaningful change, that means that you've got to be able to continue doing the thing for a long period of time. But I think for many, and I would imagine I've not been in a situation like this, but I would imagine the temptation, if I was in this kind of a situation faced with this kind of trauma, the temptation would be to use that as an excuse to give up, to allow the weight of the trauma to hinder me. But in your case, having been through this sort of thing so many times, what are some useful ways, that you have worked through trauma to continue to keep going?
I think the worst trauma obviously was Iraq. And as I said, I asked for help, right? I knew that I needed help. I talked to, a psychotherapist, just to work out everything. I had to rework, I sat down with the security person, rework where did we go wrong. And then we realized that there was nothing more that we could have done. It's just a really wrong place, wrong time, kind of incident. And then what I then did was to strengthened security training, got external people to come and help, the police and all that. We do a lot still, I think, till today, exercises where we work with the police and all that to train the volunteers. And, by being better, improving ourselves, right? Recognizing where the vulnerabilities were and improving. The other thing is I cry a lot. Right? That's my outlet. I sit down and I cry. And I don't think crying is a weakness. It's my outlet, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I cry a little bit, and then, and I work it out on my own, right? And I think the other thing is faith, prayer, strengthening your inner faith, seeking guidance all the time, and as I mentioned, I have very strong support from the family. Every time I feel I want to give up, my husband will be the first to say, you can't, because he said, this is something that, God has given to you, this talent, this strength that is not in everyone. I can't do. I took him to Afghanistan. He swore he would never go on mission with me again. He was so scared. He said, I'll take care of the kids, you go and into the war zones, right? So, he said, you have to do this, he says, because who else is going to do it if you don't? And this is a young organization, you've got to make it strong. So I'm lucky, of course I have my critics as well who say, how can you leave your husband, you very bad Muslim wife, things that I say, no, my husband said, go and do it. I'm very good Muslim wife.
My husband.
I'm obeying him, he said, go and do it, but it's
wonderful.
Yeah, but I find that it's not a burden personally, I feel that, I have enough strength, I have pretty good health, I can still continue. But, in Planetary Health, I think this is my last thing. No, it's not really. There's something else I want to do. But, what I want is to make sure that we push for systemic change. We make sure that, people recognize the links between climate change, pollution, plastics, and people's health, right? Because it's really hurt us. The pandemic didn't come out of the blue. It's because of, deforestation. It was because of animal zoonotic transmissions to people, and all the habits that people have now, eating wildlife and so forth. But, it's something that all faiths also teach us. We need to protect our environment. We need to protect, people. And I think this is something we don't have much time because we have already exceeded 1.5. We really have to accelerate whatever we're doing, have a renewable, transition to clean energy. We need to make sure that, for example, plastics, you're reading a lot about microplastics nowadays. We don't know what's in the plastics. That's the problem. There are more than 10,000 compounds in that. And some of them are very, very harmful. So, the more transparent we have, that's why we're pushing for the plastic treaty. The way we're treating our oceans, which is a fantastic carbon sink, now with deep sea mining and so on. There's so many things now going on, right? And I think that, as I said, for me, this is about intergenerational justice. But the center is only 4 years old. In August, we will turn 4. And in the 4 years, we've been able to advocate very strongly. We've been producing enough evidence that we communicate. We're training journalists from Asia. I've played a small role in supporting the development of a national planetary health action plan, which is the first in the world. Hopefully, it will be endorsed by Parliament. We've developed we've also influenced the RMK 13 to include planetary health, which means new ways of looking at economic development. And Malaysian Higher Education Blueprint as well that I've been involved with will have planetary health and sustainability as a pillar. So we've got to start educating people. At Sunway, for example, every undergraduate now does a 7-week course on planetary health. It's the first university in the world that does this, mandatory.
Fantastic.
And therefore, what are the leaders that you want to produce now? So for me now is leadership development. How do we make sure our leaders become stewards, right? So I think that's going to be really important.
With Malaysia's increasing, I think, presence in COP, and I think this year, especially with us being ASEAN chair, what are the opportunities for us as Malaysians to do our part to, not just effect change here, not just locally, but regionally and even globally as well?
I feel we have a major problem with global governance right now with the geopolitical tensions around us. The COPs are not what's going to change the world. It's going to be what happens locally, nationally, regionally. I think Malaysia has a tremendous opportunity in the ASEAN chairmanship to really highlight the impacts of climate change, to really take on some very serious, commitments into looking at deforestation, decarbonizing, really having strategies where we can actually affect behavior change. But bottom line, we've got to relook at how we develop economically, right? What is it that we want to do? GDP alone is a bad measure of development because you have seen countries with high GDPs but very unhappy people and very unsafe and so forth. But we need a well-being economics model that everyone can live a good life with dignity, with enough economic development. We shouldn't compete and learn from the mistakes of the West, right? I think we've got an opportunity there. Unfortunately, we're all racing towards wealth rather than well-being. And I think, a recalibration and finding the balance between well-being and wealth is going to be very important. Politicians hate it when I say things like this because for them, it's about showing results, GDP and so forth. But it's not. It's really about making your people happy. The best example I can give is Costa Rica. Right? Costa Rica decided to demilitarize, invest in environment, and look at the country constantly in the top 5 of the happiest people in the world. They have fantastic revenue from ecotourism, environmental protection has really helped them. They have the lowest cancer rates in the Americas. So people are living well. So, I would rather live well than to be, living extremely wealthily, right? You may have wealth, but you have no health. So I think we've got to see, how we balance.
And finally, Tan Sri, to close, what do you propose? You might have actually sort of covered this already, but what would you propose is your game of impossible for humanity at large?
Never give up. I think that we have evolved, human beings have evolved to be highly intelligent. We have the solutions. It's not something that needs to be created. The solutions are already here. It's a matter now of political will and making sure that you get things going and don't give up, right? Be persistent. So I think the game of impossible for me is to be persistently stubborn and believe that, there are solutions to almost everything and that we owe this to ourselves. What legacy do we want to leave? We owe it to future generations. And I think that, always take a step back for me is and reflect. And I think the most important value is gratitude. To be grateful for everything you have, right? If you have, gratitude, humility, hope, persistence, and stubbornness to an effect, I think nothing will be impossible.
Well, Tan Sri, this has been a really enriching conversation. So thank you for being here to do this with us.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching yet another episode of The Game of Impossible. We hope you enjoyed this one as much as we did. If you like conversations like these, we put up episodes every Friday at 6 a.m. on both our YouTube as well as Spotify. We also have short form content on both our IG as well as TikTok at The Game of Impossible. Thank you all for listening and we'll see you next week.